Okay, we got as far as the Maurya Empire. What did you notice? By the way, first I must say, Mohammad Ali, thank you so much for this. It's a fantastic resource. I shall treasure it from now onwards because it shows you a pattern that I was actually hoping to talk about today. Um, Go ahead, raise your hands. What have you guys noticed about Josefa?
सो मतलब ये हुआ कि जैसे कि आपने ट्यूटोरियल में भी बात की थी कि पहले छोटी-छोटी मतलब ऐसे कह सकते हैं कि भई कोई यूनिटी नहीं थी मतलब सब कॉन्टिनेंट में। ये है कि मौर्य एम्पायर जब अपने उरूज पर थी तो एक किस्म की हमें वहदत नज़र आई। फिर उसके बाद जब वो टूटी तो फिर दोबारा आप देख सकते हैं जैसे कि बहुत ज़्यादा जो डिसयूनिटी दोबारा नज़र आ रही है हमें।
Omer?
I noticed a very small thing, but I mean, in the entire video, we could see that Bengal was an area that was always under contest. So even like throughout the entire video, like Bengal was always either getting conquered or contested.
Okay, all right. Let's look at this tiny bit again. Okay, watch the dark red. Huh? Watch the Moria.
Ma'am, why were they of different colors if they were of the same empire? You know, light red and dark red.
It's a good
Were
question.
they different rulers?
Okay, stop there. So yes, this is actually a rather interesting but helpful cartography trick that has been used by whoever made this. Oh, we need to pause. Huh. Why do you think that large kingdoms or empires have been shown in shades of the same color? Why do you think that's happening? Okay, Ali?
I think to answer that question, I feel कि that is shown because हमने ये पढ़ा था कि जैसे in the reading के मतलब Indian संस्कृत traditions के अंदर इस तरह था कि मंडला जो एक होता है political theory के आपने अपने इर्द गिर्द को कब्जा करना होता है और उसके बाद वो vessels बन जाती हैं और मतलब उनके जो rulers होते हैं वो आपके vessels बन जाते हैं एंड मैंने ये भी आगे हमने पढ़ा था कि उन vessels जो होती है उनको रखना थोड़ा भारी पड़ता है एज इन कि you have to shower them with gifts and lands if they're faithful to you एंड eventually क्या होता था कि जो वो राजे होते थे उनको इतने शावर करते थे गिफ्ट्स के दे बिकम सो मतलब एंडाउड के वो फिर अपनी बना लेते थे तो वो उसी एम्पायर के अंदर हिस्सा होते थे बट उनकी मतलब थोड़ी सी अपनी ऑटोनॉमी थी और थोड़ी सी डिफरेंस क्रिएट हो गया तो इस वजह से आई थिंक उनको थोड़ा डिफरेंट क्रिएट किया गया
Okay, so that's one important point that the supreme political power in any given region would shift around between different families or dynasties, and usually those dynasties were in some manner connected to each other. Often, and this happens both ways, right? Um, one of them will rise and establish his superiority over all his neighbors, and he will become an emperor, or at least a king with a capital K. And his neighbors will all carry on doing what they do on a local level, but they will promise to pay allegiance to this superior king. And that means many things. That means it's a promise to take foreign policy decisions together. It's a promise to pay taxes. It's a promise to help out by producing and giving military personnel and their recruitments in times of war. That's what it means to be a vassal state, कि आपके ऊपर कोई बादशाह होता है या शहनशाह होता है, शाहों का शाह, जिसको आपको ये कुछ 3-4 चीजें देनी होती हैं. And this is kind of a normal pattern across most of the pre-modern world. It's not just India. Okay, I'll come back to that. I still see a hand raised. Ramin?
Yeah, so I think someone mentioned this in the chat, but like the value of the color may be reflective of where their power was the most concentrated. So if the color is like particularly dark, maybe that was like the main area of their stronghold, and then as it like goes down, it kind of may hint at like areas of influence, but where it's weaker than it was in other areas.
Absolutely correct. That is why you have these shades going from dark to light. That's what's going on in this graphic map. That the darkest area associated with a kingdom or a dynasty is where they are strongest, and the lighter areas are what we might call areas of influence. In your lifetime, this wasn't as common a saying as it was in my youth, where Pakistan was often referred to as the 51st state of America, because इतना close relationship था, इतनी ज़्यादा political और military और financial dependence थी. और अब भी है, मगर उस तरह से नहीं है जैसे होती थी. China is in the game now. But just like you have spheres of influence today, superpowers have spheres of influence across the world, mainly the US, but previously also the USSR or Soviet Russia. It's not so different, except that it was more formally recognized. Right now, we live in a world where national sovereignty is an absolute right of any country that cannot be challenged. So technically, every nation state is sovereign, which means it does not answer to any higher authority. It only makes alliances or agreements, including the United Nations, where everybody is there by agreement. But in the pre-modern world, there were, playing almost the role of something like a United Nations, there were imperial overlords who would exercise influence over wide regions. Right around their capitals and their area of origin, they'd be very strong. And then as you moved outwards, further and further away, the direct control would become less strong, but the sort of intangible influence would be quite present and palpable, both politically and culturally. So that's what those colors mean. Now someone tell me, what did you, twice I took you over the pattern formed by the Maurya Empire. What was it? फिर से दिखाऊं? अच्छा, अली जी बताइए.
I think अगर पहले मतलब I think पैटर्न इस तरह कहा जा सकता है कि it started like from इंडिया के हैदराबाद के ऊपर वाली साइड पे and उधर से पहले उस तरफ थोड़ा वेस्ट और नॉर्थन इंडिया की तरफ फैला and then it's spread to the eastern side, फिर थोड़ा सा नीचे and then it spread majorly काफी ऊपर तक चला गया नॉर्थन इंडिया के और अफगानिस्तान तक पहुंच गया. I think मतलब ये एक पैटर्न है कि मतलब इट स्प्रेड पहले ऊपर नॉर्दर्न इंडिया को कवर करके फिर नीचे साउथ इंडिया में भी आ गया, व्हिच वाज मतलब क्वाइट रेयर. आई थिंक फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम इस तरह हुआ होगा कि साउथ इंडिया वाज यूनाइटेड विद नॉर्दर्न इंडिया in an empire.
Keep watching. Yeah, Ali, that's right. Ramin?
Yeah, like Ali said, I noticed that it was, at least in the video, it was quite the first time that almost all of India was under like one single rule. And I noticed that it didn't really happen again almost until the Mughals. Even their like influence wasn't as extensive throughout all of India. And I noticed like in general, the video, the thing you mentioned
Oh, I'm losing your voice, Ramin. Say that again. We've lost you, Ramin. Chat में डाल दो बेटा जो भी कह रही हो. Varya.
Okay, so throughout the video, I noticed that there were few empires, dynasties, and kingdoms that basically spread to the entire subcontinent. First of all, the Maurya Empire was the one that spread it very quickly and also very extensively, and like it stayed for a very brief time as well. And like after that, there was like Delhi Sultanate, I think that covered most of the India, and then Mughal Empire, and then the EIC. So it was one of the very few empires that basically lasted, that basically covered such a larger area.
Thank you. And you noticed very well that we first see the Maurya Empire covering a vast extent all the way down south of the subcontinent. And it's very brief. That's also a really important observation. After that, we don't really see anything of that extent till the Delhi Sultanate, which we'll just look at. And then again, it was very brief. Then we see it in Mughal times, and then we see it under British rule. So, but we see things approximating that. ये जो अभी हमने ये देखा है ना, इतना कहाँ गया? नहीं, इससे भी पहले. This is very unusual. And we also don't know. Look at the date. It's the 3rd century BC. This is Ashoka's empire. And it was certainly quite widespread, but how much direct control he exerted from his capital somewhere here in Magadha and Patliputra, Bihar. Ashoka was a Bihari. So Bihar is up here in the northeast, next to Bengal. It's very, very big. It's about like here. From there, they spread out east and west. First this way, and then eventually this way. It doesn't last long, and we do not know whether Ashoka sitting here or his central government sitting here actually had total control of, let's say, these regions or these regions. Does anybody happen to know how we know the extent of the Mauryan Empire under Ashoka? What is the primary historical source जिसके जरिए हमें अशोका के बारे में कुछ भी मालूम है? जी हुज़ैफा.
तो ये स्टोन पिलर्स मिले हैं जिसके ऊपर मतलब इंस्क्रिप्शंस की गई है, मतलब खुदा
बिल्कुल सही कहा.
लिखा गया है.
कुछ आइडिया है कहाँ मिले?
वो फिर एक तो अफगानिस्तान तक मिला है, ठीक है, जिससे ये अंदाज़ा लगाया जाता है शायद ये उसका वहाँ तक असर रसूख हो, और फिर मतलब जहाँ तक ये बताया जा रहा है, ठीक है, कि यहाँ तक मिले. और फिर सिक्कों से भी पता लगा है, मतलब कि सिक्के जहाँ तक गए वहाँ तक भी कुछ अंदाज़ा हो रहा है कि यहाँ तक शायद उसकी पावर हो, उसकी हुकूमत हो.
Thank you. Aisha, would you like to add something?
Miss, it's just a guess. Is it because, like, as you said, that in the past they used to have their own historians who used to write their histories about, you know, the glory of their kingdom and stuff. So was it might be because of the first thing is that Ashoka collected the ashes and you know, distributed into 7,000 parts and asked his people to distribute it to all over India. So it might be because of those like जहाँ से भी वो ashes मिली होंगी वहां से पता चला होगा कि कहाँ कहाँ मौर्य empire का influence है. And secondly जो उनके historians ने उनकी glory पे, और because it was very historical context, तो उससे भी पता चलता होगा.
Thank you, Aisha. Actually, that is true. Certainly, there are histories of the period composed, but like a lot of old texts, हमारे पास exactly वो papyrus या rock नहीं है जिस पे 3rd century BC में कुछ लिखा गया हो, और लिखा भी नहीं गया होगा. You know, these are oral cultures. Compose हुआ होगा, orally transmit हुआ होगा, memorize हुआ होगा, and eventually made its way into later written histories of the region. So there is that, and there's usually always that. But in Ashoka's case, as Josefa told us, we have something very unique. We have these stone pillars that he placed all over. Yes, one was found in Afghanistan, more than one perhaps. One was found in the deep south. One was found in the far east of the subcontinent, and then all over in the middle. And these pillars had carved writing in them in Sanskrit. And of course, we know how to read Sanskrit because it remained a language of learning for till now. And Prakrit. Remember, I told you about Prakrit. Oh no, I told the tutorial kids about Prakrit. Prakrit was by this point the spoken, more common spoken language of North India or Hindustan. So anyway, in two decipherable known ancient languages, these pillars had edicts. Yes, thank you, Umair, edicts, which just means general principles of citizenship laid out by Ashoka, and what's very important, and a claim by Ashoka to be the rightfully chosen ruler of this entire region. वो जहाँ जहाँ उसने pillars लगाए, pillar लगाने का मतलब ही ये था that he is taking a claim, not just on the basis of military might, which was normal, right? Which is what's going on with the Cholas, several 1,000 years later. No, he made this very high moral, spiritual claim to being the rightful ruler of the subcontinent, chosen by destiny to be in this position because he had been blessed by the wisdom of the Buddha. And in his wisdom, he laid down a set of principles for living well. And I will share them with you. Actually, I should have also shown you a bunch of Ashoka pillars with their edicts, but I don't want to waste time looking for them now. But one important thing that I will make a note of, because we've already studied a little bit about it, is that always on the Ashokan pillars, there was at least one mention of the need to live with mutual respect and harmony amongst different types of communities, religious, ethnic, and caste. Why was this so important to Ashoka? Ashoka was born Kshatriya in a upper caste household that followed Vedic religion. I'm sure many of you know the story. In fact, why doesn't one of you tell me? Who knows the story of Ashoka's grand conversion? Shah Rukh Khan वाली फिल्म देखी है किसी ने? बहुत बुरी फिल्म है लेकिन शायद देखी हो. अशोका की क्या कहानी है? Have I put you all to sleep? All right, Ellie, go for it.
What I remember is कि मतलब उन्होंने काफी अपना एम्पायर बना लिया था, बड़ा कर लिया था. मतलब used to मतलब अपना उसके लिए मतलब तलवार का भी इस्तेमाल करते थे और वो मतलब फैलाने के लिए. तो उसके बाद आई डोंट नो कहाँ से उनको आई, और मैंने वो मूवी नहीं देखी हुई शाहरुख खान वाली, लेकिन मुझे लगता है, मुझे थोड़ा सा आइडिया है कि उनको कहीं से इंस्पायरेशन आई कि ये वो चीज गलत है मानना, क्योंकि बुद्धिस्ट फिलोसफी के अंदर नहीं है अलाउड. फिर उन्होंने थोड़ा सा उनसे इंस्पायर होकर उन्होंने फिर कंप्लीटली अपना जो फेथ था वो बुद्धिज्म को सब्सक्राइब कर लिया.
Okay, yes, thanks, Ayaz. Don't watch the movie, or if you do, you can watch like the first hour and you'll have this very, very famous story. So there is this very famous story associated with Ashoka. Like I said, Vedic religion following Kshatriya, who was a fantastic warrior and general and strategist and had succeeded in conquering a lot of kingdoms and regions in and around his home kingdom of Magadha, which is Bihar. But at towards, like somewhere in the middle of his life, he fought a particularly difficult and particularly brutal and bloody battle called the Battle of Kalinga. And it is said that he was walking through the battlefield, at the end of the battle, but before anybody had started cleaning up or even picking up the wounded. And it was as though all he could see was an endless ocean of dead bodies. And there was so much blood that the two sides could not even be distinguished from each other. It was just death and death and brutal death. And that this sight affected him so profoundly that he made a vow on that day to give up violence forever. Now, as you should know, one of the primary beliefs and tenets of Buddhism is non-violence towards other living things, ahimsa. So having decided to become non-violent or to give up violence because he had this very profound spiritual experience, he also became a follower of the teachings of the Buddha. And when a very powerful and influential monarch or emperor in Ashoka's case takes on a new spiritual or religious belief system, then he becomes very important in spreading it, at least and of course, given the inherent doctrine of non-violence in Buddhism, there was no such thing as forced conversions or even highly encouraged conversions or anything like that. What he did do, and you get this on the pillars and the edicts, is that he kept telling everyone in his empire and on the edges of his empire that, and these are the two words he uses. If you go back to my first slide pack, and do that before your quiz this week, you'll see these terms at the end of those slides. He keeps saying that the Brahmanas and the Shramanas must live in harmony. Brahman and Shraman. So at that time, these two words indicated those who believed in Vedic religion, that's the Brahmins, because they were the custodians of Vedic religion and they were the leaders of Vedic religion. Unhi ki wajah se wo religion ya religious system chalta tha. And then there's everybody else, like the Buddhists and the Jains and older, smaller, nature-worshipping religious cults across India that were here from before the Aryans and the Vedas, and so on. Ramin, these terms are all in the slide pack. I just mentioned that, Ahimsa, Brahman, Shaman, all of it. So that is what Ashoka is associated with. This constant exhorting of his subjects to live in peace with each other. And it's the only time really that any ruler in India has put such tight, or such constraints on the followers of Brahmanic Vedic religion. उसके बाद इस तरह से कभी नहीं हुआ, because the problem is that strict followers of Brahmanic Vedic religion were very committed to the class and caste system, but especially the class system of the 4 classes. और जो उन 4 classes में नहीं fit होता था, वो फिर outcast या untouchable होता था. एंड एक दफ़ा आप अनटचेबल हो गए तो फिर आपके साथ कुछ नहीं हो सकता, ना कोई पॉलिटिकल अलायंस हो सकती है, ना कोई फाइनेंशियल ट्रांजैक्शन हो सकती है, ना आप कुछ भी नहीं कर सकते, आप साए के पास से भी नहीं गुजर सकते. So it made life very difficult if you were inflexible about following Vedic religion, and no one has ever really followed it that inflexibly. But this period of Mauryan rule and Ashoka's rule was super important in opening up and in a way, what should we say, a sort of liberalization of Indic religious systems, because this is the period from which onwards we can actually talk about several centuries of Buddhism being the dominant religio-cultural influence across South Asia. Because इसके बाद आपको शायद एक और क्या कहते हैं फेमिलियर नाम नजर, अच्छा ये इन्होंने इंडो ग्रीक कह दिया, ये मुझे प्लीज कोई बताए कि ये इंडो ग्रीक किंगडम क्या है?
Alexander.
हाँ, और क्या हो सकता है? यस, अलेक्जेंडर, एब्सोल्युटली।
अलेक्जेंडर ने जो अपने जर्नल वगैरह छोड़े थे वो यहाँ पर
हाँ,
रहने लग
हाँ,
गए, यहीं के मतलब कस्टम्स वगैरह अपना लिए।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल। और उनको क्या कहते थे? अभी यहाँ शायद था, मैंने देखा था, नहीं पहले चला गया, वो छोटा होता गया। और ये इंडो सिथियंस किसको कह रहे हैं? Satraps, that's what they were called, satraps, the Greek generals. Okay, I hope this one's familiar, this purple one. Is it? Who are the Kushans? Aisha.
They were the descendants of Ghaznavid kingdom.
What? Date
No.
देखो भाई, ऊपर कोने में नजर आ रही है? अभी हम कितनी दूर हैं गजनविद से? कोई और बता दे मुझे।
अच्छा, तो ये तो 96 ईस्वी है, यानी तकरीबन 1000 साल रहते हैं तकरीबन।
हाँ,
या
900 तो
900
रहते
साल।
हैं। हाँ, 900 साल अभी रहते हैं।
अच्छा, कुषाण का ये था ना कि जो आपने वो बताया था, मैप दिखाया था, उसमें काफ़ी आगे तक सेंट्रल एशिया तक गई हुई थी ये
हाँ,
इनकी सल्तनत, और इसके 2 कैपिटल्स थे। इतनी बड़ी हो गई थी कि इसके लिए 2 दारुल हुकूमत की ज़रूरत पड़ती थी इसको चलाने के लिए।
And anybody else, what falls under the Kushan Empire? The other thing to remember, look, and they're growing. इसी देखो कैसे रंग बदलते हैं, जैसे हड़प कर लेते हैं, अब फिर वो पुश आउट हो रहे हैं इस तरफ। और फिर खत्म हो गए साउथ एशिया से। So under the sphere of influence of the, एक तो the important thing is the Kushans, and this is now, look at the date, we're like 400, 500 years ahead from Ashoka. The Kushan Empire is also largely Buddhist. Within the Kushan Empire, and look where it is, like which modern day countries did the Kushan Empire encompass? Which modern day countries do you think that it encompassed? Varia says Afghanistan, absolutely. Where else? Which modern day countries do you think are part of the Kushan Empire? Yes, some parts of North India. Ali, I'm really like, if I'm desperate, I'm going to come back to you, but I must have other people talk. Come on, guys. Parts of Iran, sure. Parts of Balochistan, yes. Uzbekistan is a little far away, but I'm actually not sure. There might, yes, I think there were some bits and pieces at one time. Nepal, not quite. Thank you, Zubair. Pakistan. Now, what remnant of the Kushan Empire is left with us here in Pakistan? What do we call it? Peshawar is a very old city. वो सिर्फ कुशान्स की नहीं है, उसका जिक्र आपको बहुत सी चीजों में मिलता है. But yes, sure, Peshawar and Taxila. That's right. What's the other word for this period's Buddhist cultural zone that covered most of northern Punjab, Kashmir, and KP at this time, and Afghanistan, of course. Gandhara. Thanks, Ali. Gandhara. Okay. तो ये जो लफ्ज आपने कभी कहीं सुना होगा, ये कभी शायद किसी पाकिस्तान स्टडीज की किताब में देखा होगा, गंधारा इस मैप में नहीं है, but Gandhara is part of the Kushan Empire or sphere of influence. Now we might be able to actually see where are they at their biggest, somewhere. Huh. They don't come all the way down, but look at it. We could certainly talk about the Kushan Empire as a period of imperial consolidation in South Asia. Look what's interesting about it, that it straddles the Hindu Kush. Adha empire is taraf, Adha us taraf. और ये कई दफा हुआ है in history, right? When else do we see empires that do that, that are on both sides of the Hindu Kush?
गौरी
जी हुज़ैफा,
गौरी सल्तनत,
बिल्कुल, गौरी सल्तनत और हमारे दोस्त जिनके बारे में हमने इतनी बातें की हैं चंद
मुगल,
नहीं, मुगल तो हाँ थे थोड़े दिनों के लिए, और गजनविद, that's right, because Ghazna is in Afghanistan, it's on the other side of the Hindu Kush. Okay. So that is a long period of high Buddhist culture, Buddhist influence. The Kushan empires actually were quite influential in taking Buddhism out of South Asia and spreading it across the rest of Asia. So you got a lot of Buddhists in Central Asia, and through Central Asia, then eventually China. यहाँ से भी गए हैं, ठीक है, यहाँ से भी बहुत गए हैं, चाइना और इधर फिर फार ईस्ट और साउथ ईस्ट एशिया. Oh, we almost missed that. Hang on. Okay, who are these guys? Note the date and try to think back to, or if you can, open up the chapter from Bose and Jalal. Who are the Guptas? I'll wait. जी हुज़ैफा.
तो गुप्ता जो थे इनका मज़हब जो है बुद्ध मत नहीं था, मतलब हिंदू ट्रेडिशन से इनका ताल्लुक था. तो यानी उस वक्त जो पॉपुलेशन थी वो अक्सर बुद्धिस्ट थी, लेकिन जो हुक्मरानी जिनके पास आई वो गुप्ता के पास, जो कि हिंदू थे.
Aisha?
They brought back the Vedic culture and the influential Hinduism in India.
That's right. So what is associated with them and why they are historically important is because under them, and look at this empire, it's quite vast and certainly influential. Now look at this, even though we have a totally different dynasty ruling a very large area in central India, and it's been given a contrasting color to show you that these are totally independent political units, but nevertheless they're neighbors. And what happens when you are neighbors? You might be at war with each other, there might be like a hard border, but what happens when you're neighbors, when it's just the proximity of being next to somebody? I mean, we are very well placed to answer that question as modern day Pakistanis. Are we like completely different from Afghanistan and Iran and India, Afghanistan and India? Yes, thank you. Ideas travel, cultural exchange, often trade. You know, people who are at war nevertheless want to make money, and trade continues. Trade is really, 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 really important, because when trade routes remain open, what happens? It's not just goods that are going from one area to another area, it's also the people who are taking and carrying those goods, right? Exactly, people travel. And the people who are taking and carrying those goods are carrying with them their language, their culture, their religious norms, and those things then become familiar in the regions where these traders tend to go very often. Exactly as happened with the Arab traders who came and settled right here on the coast of Kerala in the 7th century, during or perhaps even before the Prophet's lifetime. The Mappala and all the Mappala Muslim communities now who live in South India trace their descent from those Arab traders. तो एक मतलब पूरी नई कम्युनिटी और नया कल्चर आप क्रिएट कर सकते हैं just through continuous trade. Okay, lots of people have called this the golden age of India. I mean, maybe Ashoka's was the golden age of India. Maybe Akbar's was the golden age of India. Why is this the golden age of India? Yeah, technological advancements, certainly. And the final written forms of lots of the Sanskrit classic texts were actually done under the patronage of the Gupta court. Peace, yes, Ruqayya, but all empires create peace for a while, right? That is actually the great advantage of empire in the pre-modern world. Large areas producing different goods and services come under one umbrella. So no one within that area is fighting against one another. So that's why empires were a good thing. They weren't always a good thing, but that was one of their advantages in the pre-modern world. But it's not us. I mean, ये किसी ने कहा है ना, अब आप सोचें कि किसी ने बैठ के मॉडर्न इरा में 20th century में, उससे पहले नहीं, कभी क्या दिया होगा, ये किताब लिखते हुए सोचा होगा, हाँ भाई ये जो है गोल्डन एज है इंडिया का. Why this one? There was peace under other empires. There was trade under other empires. There were technological advancements under other empires. There was beautiful literature and art produced under other empires. So why is this the golden age of India? Aisha?
Miss, it was because despite reviving the Brahminical tradition, there was, tolerance for, political, social, and religious flexibility. Like everybody was free to, carry on with their religious views in their empire, in certain areas of their empire. So, there was tolerance towards each other in the Gupta Empire. That is why it was known as the classical or golden age.
That kind of sounds like a description of Ashoka, actually, Huzaifa.
ये इस तरह से हो सकता है कि चूंकि इंडिया के साथ हम ये मतलब हिंदू आइडेंटिटी लगाते हैं और पाकिस्तान के साथ इस्लामी, तो ये हो सकता है कि ये उस नैरेटिव में फिट बड़ी अच्छी तरीके से आ सकता है कि भाई जिस तरह से गुप्ता एम्पायर ने जैसे कह सकते हैं कि हिंदू ट्रेडिशन को दोबारा ज़िंदा किया और फिर वो टेक्स्ट और गीता वगैरह भी इसमें लिखा गया. तो एक बंदा जो इस तरह के नैरेटिव को अच्छा समझता है या जो मतलब इस वजह से लिखना चाहता है, उसके लिए इससे बेहतर और कौन सा हो सकता है. जैसे मिसाल के तौर पर बुद्ध मत जो है एक किस्म का, वो उससे पहले राज कर रहे, ठीक है, और उसके बाद जो है मुसलमान आ गए, तो दरमियान में जो दिखाने के लिए ये एक बेहतरीन दौर हो सकता है, सुनहरी दौर.
बिल्कुल सही. That is exactly correct. Huzaifa is on the ball. It is because this period, after these many centuries of Buddhism being the primary religious influence in the wider region, under the Gupta Empire, there is a revival of Vedic religion. They practiced and patronized means supported in every way, Vedic religion. And under their rule, yes, many of the great texts associated with Vedic tradition were produced. The other things are not untrue. Certainly, it was a successful imperial project, and to be a successful imperial project, certain wisdom is surely required. What will keep your people from rebelling? What will keep their bellies full? You know, these are practical things that a government that wishes to be successful needs to take care of. Actually, I'm curious about something. Many of you in the chat have said something about the Gupta Empire being great because people were free to practice different religions, and there was tolerance and diversity. Where are you guys getting that information from? Is it like the Gupta Empire Wikipedia page?
Ma'am, it was from the chapter that you assigned us to read from Aisha's, like, what was the name? The author. It was in that text.
Are you sure that's about the Gupta Empire?
Because, you know, I made detailed notes from it. So, yeah, it was from there.
And not about the Mauryan Empire?
No.
Okay. I confess I'm a little surprised, and I will go back and check. Although I do know that and remember that certainly the Gupta Empire, the Gupta government was not repressive. They were wise, and under them, the populations living under them prospered. But that is not, that however, is not the reason why it is remembered in modern history writing as the golden age of India. It is exactly as Josefa said, that it is because the revival of Vedic religion, which is today called Hinduism, happened under the Guptas. And as one of you pointed out just now, Hindu religion in the form that we know it today, the familiar Hindu religion, began to take shape and solidify in this period, which is like the 5th century. You know, we're a good 2,000 years down the line from the earliest sources and origins of Vedic religion. So it's almost as though something new was created under the influence of the Gupta Empire. And that is the basis of the Hindu religious tradition as we know it today. And that's why it's hailed as India's golden age. And I'll remind you again about the colonial era narrative that we all continue to subscribe to, that at some point in the British colonial period, British colonial historians decided on this story for India, that original India is Hindu, original Indians are Hindu, therefore the Hindu community of India is the one who has a genuine birthright to this land. Haq unka hi banta hai. The Muslims were outsiders. They came as conquerors. They stayed as tyrants. And the British came as saviors. They defeated the outsider tyrant Muslim and freed the authentic original Hindu people of India. So if you have decided that that is the story of India, और उस स्टोरी में कुछ हिंदुस्तान में रहने वाले लेजिटिमाइज हो गए और कुछ डीलेजिटिमाइज हो गए, although खुद तो वो ऐसा सोचते नहीं थे, Then you need a golden age that reflects that narrative, that upholds that narrative. So this is that golden age, the one that ties in with that narrative. Okay, where do we go from here? The Huns were also probably Buddhist, though, by the way. वे देखो गायब हो गए. अब बहुत से छोटे 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 kingdoms आ गए. Then we have this one little last blip under another Hindu ruler subscribing to Vedic religion, not that much after the Guptas, 200 years later, called Harsha. But this is the last time. This is the last time that you have a Vedic religious Hindu king who makes any successful attempt at unifying large parts of the subcontinent. And look at this date. Try to always, when you see dates, develop a sense of historical chronology. What's going on in the rest of the world right now? Any sense?
मिस क्या आप ये जो बार से इसको हटा सकती हैं, नजर नहीं आ रहा.
क्या हटाओ? अच्छा,
ये
डेट्स
इसके
नहीं
ऊपर
नजर आ रही हैं?
जी नजर नहीं आ रहा कुछ.
I know, but I don't know how to wait. Okay, now
It's visible now.
अब ठीक है.
okay. I'm so sorry. See, this is what I was worried about. On my desktop, this kind of stuff happens. अच्छा जी, अब डेट नजर आ रही है. तो इस वक्त बाकी दुनिया में क्या हो रहा है? अंदाजन कोई बता दो. Make some wild guesses. Someone other than Huzaifa, who is very well historically versed.
Islam.
Thank you. That's a very broad thing. Can you say more, Mer?
Islamophobia.
Yeah. No, not Islamophobia. The rise of Islam, because Muhammad was born in 600 AD, and Arabia was unified around, I think, 622, something like that, or 632. So Islam is starting to spread across Arabia, and then the caliphates after that.
We're close. Yes. Your dates are slightly off, but the century is right there. This is the era of the rise of the Islamic Empire. The peninsula is being united, and we are moving out from the peninsula into other parts of Asia. Okay, what's happening elsewhere? So that was the easy one. हमने 644 की डेट देखी और हमें याद आ गया, कचिंग हो गई दिमाग में कि हाँ ये rise of Islam, early years of Islam. That's absolutely correct. What else is happening? Who's the China fan? Umair, is it you? Somebody keeps talking to me about Chinese history. I think it's Umair. What's happening in China?
I just sent you one email about it.
I know, no, but you've mentioned it in class also, I think. No? No one knows what's happening in China?
There's probably some dynasty that's conquering China. That's always what happens there.
That's right. What's happening in Europe?
यूरोप टूट चुका है ना इस वक्त. तो मतलब हंस के हमले के बाद जो है वो रोमन एम्पायर तो टूट चुकी है.
रोमन एम्पायर टूट चुका है, बिल्कुल. यूरोप के अंदर वेस्टर्न रोमन एम्पायर टूट चुका है fragmented into lots of tiny polities. But there is such a thing as the Eastern Roman Empire, Where is the Eastern Roman Empire?
The Byzantines, right?
Where was their capital?
In modern day Turkey.
Istanbul.
Istanbul. Istanbul is
Istanbul.
Constantine. It was called Constantine at that time.
Constantinople. इस्तांबुल का पुराना नाम है Constantinople, after the Emperor Constantine, who established that as the capital city of the Eastern Roman Empire. Western Europe में जो हो रहा था, the Germanic tribes, the Huns, all these warlike northern peoples had come and kicked some Roman ass, and the Roman Empire had dissolved in Western Europe. But in Eastern Europe and Western Asia, I think about where Turkey is, and not just Western Asia, not just Turkey, but Syria, Jordan, Egypt, बिल्कुल जो Mediterranean Sea का सारा Eastern एक corridor है, all of that is the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Empire. So that is alive and well, but getting weak. Because it's getting weak, the Arab armies, the Arab Muslim armies, are easily able to capture its outlying provinces, which were Egypt and Syria. अब ये बताएं कि बाकी सेंट्रल और वेस्टर्न एशिया में क्या हो रहा है. अब हम अगर सीरिया से और जरा ईस्ट की तरफ आते हैं तो क्या हो रहा है.
सासानी खानदान हुकूमत कर रहा है, मतलब
कहाँ पे?
और उनको भी शिकस्त ईरान, इराक और अफगानिस्तान, बल्ख की तरफ और थोड़ा सा आगे की तरफ, जैसे सेंट्रल
So the Persian
का जो
ancient Persian Empire, it's a very, very old empire which many dynasties ruled. But at the time of the coming of the Arab Muslim armies, the dynasty ruling the Persian world was the Sasanians or the Sassanids. The Sasanians ruled out of Ctesiphon, which is probably in modern day Iraq, not Iran. Huh? But what we call Iran, Iraq, Khorasan, Afghanistan, even parts of Central Asia like Azerbaijan and all were part of this Sasanian Persian zone. Unlike the Byzantine Empire, the Sasanian Empire was completely overrun by the Arab Muslim armies. वो उनके कैपिटल तक पहुंच गए और पूरी तरह से शिकस्त दे दी, उनकी गवर्नमेंट ही खत्म हो गई. So Iran and Iraq come under full Muslim rule. Iraq more so because it's right there, right? Proximity, geographic proximity matters. So this is what is going on in the wider world while this is happening in India. What is the picture that forms in your mind? Yes, Umair, Palestine as well. But Palestine is like, I don't know. Palestine is the size of defense phase 1 or something. Even then. It's part of Syria. जिसको हम Syria कहते हैं is not the modern nation state of Syria, but Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, all of that is part of historic Syria. Just like when we talk about India historically, Bangladesh and Pakistan are part of it. So this is a century of a lot of dynamic change going on all over the world. And in India, what you've got is this situation of, yes, Harsha makes this one very short-lived attempt to unite a bunch of North Indian regions, but you have that the situation that will more or less be the same. Dekho kitni jaldi ghaib ho gaya. Up till, keep watching, now that you can see the date counter. I was just going to stay this pattern of smaller kingdoms and sometimes smaller empires, but nothing very Nothing that we would call pan-Indian. Here are our friends the Cholas growing, and here are our friends the Ghaznavids. Acha, please note that the Pala Empire that the Cholas, and look at this. That's why I like the color coding here. This corridor along the eastern coast of the Indian peninsula is not directly part of the Chola Empire, but it is part of the sphere of influence of the Chola Empire. So the next thing at the edge of that is Pala, Bengal. So it made perfect sense for them to expand out into that. Look how enormous this is. It was short-lived, but it was really big. This is a little under 6 minutes long, and I would strongly advise everyone to watch it many, many, many times. अच्छा जी, अब ये आ गए वहीं से थोड़ी सी आखिरी 10-15 मिनट में इनकी बात हो जाए. Who were the Ghurids? Where did they come from? This is now going right back to our reading for this week, the second half of chapter 1. जी अली.
गौरिद जो थे वो उनके सक्सेसर्स थे थोड़े से, मतलब जो उनसे पहले थे गजनवीद, उनके सक्सेसर्स थे. जब गजनवीद एम्पायर बेसिकली मैं एक थोड़ा सा भूल गया हूँ कि वो किधर से आए थे, लेकिन जब उनका बेसिकली उनकी जो कैपिटल था उधर गजनवी में गजना में, वो उसको उन्होंने रेड किया था और उसको दे बर्न्ड इट टू द ग्राउंड. तो उधर से वो खत्म हो गया. फिर ये लोग जो गजनवीद थे, ये लोग आगे लाहौर में उन्होंने कैपिटल बना लिया काफी देर तक. और उन्होंने जब वो उधर थोड़ी सी अपनी सल्तनत रखी, तो उन्होंने वहां पे क्या कहते हैं फिर भी अपनी ना वो जारी रखी. इंडिया में रेड्स करते थे, लेकिन पीछे से गौरिद जो थे वो और स्ट्रॉन्ग हो रहे थे, और वो फिर उन्होंने और आगे आगे कब्जे करना शुरू कर दिए, और इवेंचुअली दे सॉर्ट ऑफ उन्होंने उसको खत्म कर दिया गजनवीद को. तो उनको बेसिकली आई थिंक रिप्लेस किया उन्होंने गौरिद.
अच्छा ठीक. हुज़ैफा.
अच्छा, तो गजनवियों का असल मकसद ये था कि वो मगरब की तरफ कूच करें, मतलब उस तरफ के इलाकों को कब्ज़ा करें जो कि इस्लामी थे, मतलब ईरान वगैरह की उस तरफ के. लेकिन उसी वक्त जो है सल्जूकी भी ताकत में आ रहे थे, और उन्होंने जब महमूद गजनवी जब वो मर गया, उसके जो दोनों बेटे थे उनका भी ख़ात्मा हो गया. तो फिर जो बाद के जो आए वो कमज़ोर थे, ठीक है, उनके पास इतनी ताकत नहीं थी कि उनका मुकाबला कर सके. तो सल्जूकियों ने शिकस्त दी, तो वो मतलब फिर आगे उनके जो दूसरे इलाके थे वो तो निकल गए, सिर्फ अफ़गानिस्तान और इस तरफ का इलाका रह गया, लाहौर तक का. लेकिन फिर उससे मेरे ख़्याल में बैराम शाह था या कोई दूसरा था, उससे ये गलती हुई कि जो अलाउद्दीन जासूस है उसका भाई मेरे ख़्याल में मार दिया कुछ इस तरह. तो एक नहीं होता फैमिली फ्यूड शुरू हो गया, जिसमें फिर जो गौरी थे वो दरअसल उनके वेसल्स थे एक किस्म के, जो नहीं होता नीचे हुक्मरानी किया करते थे, उनके ऊपर हुक्मरानी गजनवी किया करते थे. लेकिन फिर गौरियों के पास ताकत आ गई और उन्होंने गजना को जो है जलाकर खाक कर दिया, और फिर इस तरह चलता रहा. जो गजनवी थे वो फिर लाहौर और इस तरफ के इलाके के हुक्मरान रह गए. उनसे जो दूसरी हुकूमतें थी वो छीन ली गई थी. लेकिन फिर क्या हुआ कि गजनवियों ने ऐसा किया कि वो यहाँ के मतलब कस्टम्स वगैरह उन्होंने अपनाना शुरू कर दिए, और फिर रेडिंग जो करते थे वो भी ख़त्म कर दी, क्योंकि उनका असल मकसद ये था कि यहाँ से पैसा उठाकर जो अपनी जंग है मगरब की तरफ उसमें लगाया जाए. लेकिन फिर चूँकि वहाँ पर उनको कुछ नुमाया कामयाबी नहीं हुई, तो वो भी काम उन्होंने छोड़ दिया, और आहिस्ता आहिस्ता जो गौरी थे उन्होंने फिर गजनवियों को बेदखल कर दिया.
Thank you. And you don't need to remember all of that. But whatever's in the reading, you do need to know it. One important point that many people have made, even in the chat, is that the Ghurids were vassals or subordinate allies to the Ghaznavids. So please notice this pattern. When the Ghaznavid Empire becomes weak at the center, इनको opportunity मिल जाती है to rise and take their place. So this kind of sort of baton relay between connected houses of leadership is what's more common than complete outsiders coming and establishing themselves somewhere. So the Ghurids are able to come into northern South Asia and establish some kind of imperial control because the Ghaznavids had already created a path for them. And Lahore, up to Lahore, there was Ghaznavid influence, if not direct political control. Their initial plans were not different to the Ghaznavids, as Huzaifa just told us. It seemed that the early incursions were raids for raising funds to conduct the wars on the western end, which were far more important. Why were they far more important? Because इस ज़माने में 13th खास तौर से 13th और 14th century में क्या हो रहा है बाकी दुनिया में. 13th century के बारे में मुझे अगर हुज़ैफा और अली के अलावा कोई बता दे कि बाकी एशिया में क्या हो रहा है तो फिर मैं शायद उनको कोई प्राइज दे दूँ. What is happening in the rest of Asia in the 13th century? Because
Many empires are beginning to emerge.
Which one, Fardan? There's something really, really massive that happens in the 13th century.
The Khilji Empire is starting to emerge.
वो तो यहाँ आ
As
गए.
a
ये तो
strong
14th में शुरू हो गए ना. 14th में 13th century में एशिया में क्या हुआ? Yes, thank you. The Mongols, okay? The Mongol conquests, Genghis Khan, his sons and his grandsons. You know that the Mongol conquests went on and on and on for a whole century almost. It wasn't just Genghis Khan, he started them, and then his sons carried on, and then his grandsons carried on. And then by the time of his grandsons and great-grandsons, they controlled most of the known world. And they settled down and divided this empire amongst different branches of Genghis Khan's sons and their families. But what major destruction was caused by the Mongol invasions in Asia that would have been felt all the way from Mediterranean North Africa to Hindustan? एक ऐसी चीज की Mongols ने हमारी कहानी की relevance से that was a game changer, that actually allowed for people like Muhammad Ghaur to even emerge. What was going on? Destroyed Delhi Sultanate. Nahi, Delhi Sultanate, this is the thing. We need to be clear on our chronologies because then we need to know what caused what. The Delhi Sultanate is a result of the Mongol invasions over the rest of Asia.
उन्होंने बगदाद को तबाह किया था.
बगदाद को तबाह किया तो बगदाद के साथ साथ क्या तबाह किया?
खलीफा भी और फिर खिलाफत भी चली गई थी क्योंकि
खिलाफत भी चली गई. Yes, sir, they wiped out China, but then they took it over and they made it prosperous again. Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, established a Sino-Mongol empire in China. In fact, he became completely Chinese. But for us, right, when we are looking at this period in Hindustan where waves and waves of Muslim invaders are coming in and grabbing territory and settling down, not raiding and leaving like Mahmud. Ye hai na farq. मोहम्मद गौरी के बाद क्या होता है, ये बहुत एक नई चीज होती है, that they don't raid and leave, but they start settling down. Why? Because they have been driven out of the rest of Asia, which is far more interesting to them. As Josefa just told you, in the beginning, the Ghurids were raiding North India to raise money to fight their Western wars. That meant they were jockeying for control over the Caliphal Empire. Abbasid Caliphate के साथ late 9th century onwards ये होता है कि the Abbasid Caliphs recruited so many Turkish tribes and Turkish slave soldiers both into their imperial army that within a few generations they became completely dependent on them. And it was these Turkic generals who were the true power in the Caliphal Empire. They never got rid of the Abbasid Caliph. The Abbasid Caliph, till his execution by the Mongols in 1258, remained the head of the titular honorary head of the entire Muslim world. Even people like the Ghaznavids, who were politically autonomous and independent, ठीक है, वो अपना उन्होंने एक छोटा सा एम्पायर इस्टेब्लिश कर लिया था, उसमें वो उस पे वो खुल के राज करते थे, मगर लेजिटिमेसी के लिए बहुत जरूरी था उनके लिए भी to acknowledge the superior authority of the Caliph in Baghdad, to get written documents and other things from the Caliph in Baghdad, bestowing the Sultanate of Ghazna on that dynasty. So this question of legitimacy and perception of legitimacy is very important. And we'll see it at play again when we come to the Mughals. But first we see it playing out in for 400 years, the Abbasid Caliphal Empire remained controlled by Turkish generals who never got rid of the Caliph, who never wanted to take on that title, who invented and took on the title of Sultan. And this title meant purely worldly political ruler who was the representative of God's Caliph. So in some ways, the Abbasid Caliph sitting in Baghdad actually becomes like a figure like the Pope in Rome for the Catholic world. Immense authority, the bestower of legitimacy, but no direct political or military power. So the Ghaznavids here are, amongst some of the warrior hopefuls who are trying to get a piece of the Grand Caliphal Empire. That is why Mahmud arrives into Punjab and Multan to attack and get rid of the Ismaili principality there. It is also why the Ghurids eventually come and stay. They are also working under this sort of a Sunni Abbasid mandate to take care of heretical Muslims who have for centuries taken refuge in Hindustan. मतलब वही कहानी है जो मोहम्मद बिन कासिम की थी, जो महमूद की थी. But at the same time, the rest of Asia, the heartland of the Islamic imperial world, is a place of total chaos after the Mongols have raided and invaded. And so India, where the Mongols didn't quite do much damage, they did some very fast raids and ran off, India becomes a land of opportunity. And so they start coming here in droves, and they start conquering and they start settling. And those are the origins of what we call the Delhi Sultanate. It lasted many centuries under many dynasties. Now look at this. Look at this large centralized area. Look at that. This was under the great conqueror, Muhammad bin Tughlaq. It didn't last long, but he did it. Acha, ab ye dekho. The Bahmani Sultanate. This is the Deccan in the 14th century. What is this Sultanate? For starters, and I'm just going to tell you this story and we'll wind up for today. For starters, the Bahmani Sultanate is Muslim. It's not some other random Muslims who came from somewhere else. It is one of the Tughlaq governors who was powerful enough and ambitious enough to break away from the Tughlaqs and establish an independent kingdom of his own. It lasted for a while, then it broke up into the five Deccani kingdoms against whom the Mughals kept fighting wars. So, if the Mongols never came to India, then why did the Khiljis fight the Mongols? No, they raided India, but they didn't stay long and they didn't make a concerted effort. It was too difficult. And there was too much exciting stuff in the rest of Asia for them to do. Actually, they got a big prize. India would have been a big prize, but the big prize that the Mongols got was A, Iraq, and B, China. उसके बाद बस इत्तेफाक है in a way that they didn't concentrate their energies on India. They only used to send smaller raiding parties who were easily defeated and repulsed and thrown out. Yes, Huzaifa, the Mamluks defeated the Mongols at the Battle of Ain Jalut, but which Mamluks and where? It wasn't our Indian Mamluks. There was another Mamluk dynasty. कहाँ पे Huzaifa?
मिस्र के थे ना वो तो?
Misr ke. So that is like at the other end of the Islamic world. Next time we'll have a little bit of a conversation about what this Mamluk business and slave dynasties and all that means. ठीक है, so see you Thursday. See some of you tomorrow in tutorial. Please pay attention to the timeline, finish the reading, go through this map and all that other fun stuff. Mamluks ना Turkish, यहाँ भी Turkish थे और Egypt में भी Turkish थे, मगर मुख्तलिफ किस्म के Turks थे. Somebody wanted to was saying something. I'm sorry. Somebody saying something? All right. Okay. Take care, guys. Khuda Hafiz.
Hafiz.
Miss, I need to talk to you after the class, please.
Then stay, Aisha. Let everyone leave. Guys, can everyone please leave the meeting?